Could a slave in chains shake the greatest power of the ancient world? In the 1st century BC, one man stood against Rome, an empire of armies, laws, and iron. Welcome to this new video in our series on military leaders, where today we delve into the life of one of the greatest military commanders, Spartacus, a gladiator, slave, and rebel warrior who became a legend. Spartacus is a historical figure of enigmatic origin, likely born between 105 and 100 BC in Thrace, modern-day Western Bulgaria, probably to the Thracian Maiden tribe. Little is known for certain about his family or upbringing, but ancient sources agree that he was Thracian and from a semi-nomadic tribal environment known for its warfare and herding. Historically, Thrace existed on the periphery of the Greek Mediterranean world and was home to warring tribes whom the Greeks considered barbarians. With the decline of the Macedonian kingdom and the conflicts among Alexander the Great's successors, Thrace became a turbulent region. With the rise of the Roman Republic in the 2nd century BC, it became a source of slaves due to wars and instability. It is possible that Spartacus was captured in one of these conflicts and sold into slavery to the Romans. Most of what we know about Spartacus comes from later Roman sources such as Plutarch, Appian, Florus and Sallust, all of whom focused more on his role as leader of the slave revolt, the Third Servile Revolt, between 73 and 71 BC, than on his early life. Plutarch, in his biography of Crassus, provides the clearest account of Spartacus, but he wrote more than 200 years after the events, so his account should be taken with caution. An unconfirmed theory links Spartacus to the Spartacid dynasty, which ruled the Cimmerian kingdom of the Bosporus, north of the Black Sea, raising the romantic possibility that he might have been of noble birth. But there is no conclusive historical evidence for this. Spartacus was a man of great spirit and remarkable physical strength, qualities that later explain his transformation into a warrior and then a gladiator slave. Greco-Roman sources describe him as more intelligent and cultured than one would expect from his position, even suggesting he was more Greek than Thracian in temperament. One account relates that a mysterious prophecy accompanied him from the moment of his capture, when his wife, a prophetess, saw a sign of a great power that would end in tragedy. Sources indicate he fought the Romans in Thrace before his capture, but details of that period remain obscure. Was he an ordinary soldier or a commander? This unanswered question, however, partially explains his later military success. He was likely captured in the 70s BC and quickly transported to Italy to be sold into slavery, before appearing in the historical record in 73 BC. In the Roman world, slavery was common and inherently harsh, though its conditions varied. While many slaves endured backbreaking and degrading labour, gladiators occupied a unique position, a short and perilous life, but one with the potential for freedom and glory. With the peak of the popularity of blood games in the late Republic, the demand for slave gladiators increased. Spartacus was taken to a gladiatorial school, Laudus, in Capua, where living and training conditions were better than most forms of slavery for one price, fighting to the death in the Roman arenas. Spartacus ended up at the gladiatorial school run by Lentulus Batiatus in Capua, one of the most important urban centres in Roman Italy, located on the famous Appian Road. There he was trained as a Gallus, a fighter with a short sword and a large shield, a role that symbolized Rome's ancient enemies. His fighting abilities quickly became apparent. Although the lives of gladiators were better than those of most slaves, their harshness and constant danger made rebellion inevitable. Spartacus arrived in Italy during a turbulent period in the history of the Roman Republic, following civil wars and power struggles, and in a society marked by a vast gap between the wealthy elite and the masses of slaves and the poor. Italy, particularly the south and Sicily, was fertile ground for revolution, following a series of slave uprisings and social wars in the preceding decades. In 73 BC, the spark ignited. Spartacus, along with a dozen gladiators, led a daring escape from the Capua school, and the flight quickly escalated into a widespread revolt. Enlarged numbers of slaves and the poor joined them, plundering villages and villas before taking refuge on Mount Vesuvius. There, Spartacus achieved his first major victory, routing a Roman force in a surprise attack using an unexpected tactic. With this victory, news spread throughout Italy. A new rebellion had begun, more organized and dangerous than any before. Thus erupted the Third Servile War, led by Spartacus, the man who had transformed from a slave fighter into a symbol of defiance in the heart of the Roman world. The Spartacus War lasted about 2.5 years, from the slaves' escape from Capua in 73 BC until the suppression of the rebellion in 71 BC at the Silerus River. Ancient historians agree that Spartacus led a massive army of tens of thousands, moving first east and then north along the Apennine Mountains, achieving significant victories against Roman forces. Accounts differ regarding his objectives. Appian suggests he approached Rome, and perhaps even intended to attack it, while Plutarch describes his march north toward the Po Valley, as if his goal was to cross the Alps and escape Italy. As the number of rebels grew, they were not only slaves, but also included impoverished and disaffected former soldiers. The movement transformed from a desperate escape into a well-organized rebellion with a substantial army, equipped with weapons and spoils, and capable of defeating Roman consuls one by one. Spartacus achieved successive victories against Glaba, then Verenius, and finally the consuls' armies in 72 BC, forcing the Senate to mobilize the full force of the state. Finally, with the influx of Roman legions led by Crassus, Pompey, and Lucullus from the provinces, the war entered its decisive phase. Despite early victories, the rebels suffered heavy losses and lost prominent leaders like Oenomaus. It became clear that Rome would not back down, and that this slave conflict was no longer a local revolt, but a war threatening the very heart of the Republic. A war that made Spartacus the most dangerous internal enemy Rome faced in the final years of its Republican era. The accounts of Appian and Plutarch agree that the end of Spartacus's war was inevitable. After returning to southern Italy, Spartacus faced Crassus's army of 8 trained legions, while Pompey and Lucullus advanced to reinforce him from the rear. Spartacus attempted to salvage what remained of his forces by striking a deal with Cilicia pirates to cross the Strait of Messina into Sicily, but they betrayed him, leaving him besieged in the far south of the peninsula. In late 71 BC, the decisive battle took place at the Silerus River. Despite the slave army being reduced to tens of thousands and surrounded by Roman fortifications, Spartacus fought bravely in the final battle. Sources describe him fighting in the front lines, wounded but steadfast, until he fell among his men. His body was never recovered. With the end of the battle, the Third Servile War came to a close. Pompey pursued the remnants of the rebellion, massacring thousands, while Crassus ended the conflict with horrific cruelty. He crucified 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome, a bloody message to anyone who dared challenge the authority of the Republic. Thus ended the Spartacus rebellion, a rebellion that shook Rome and exposed the fragility of a world built on slavery. The Spartacus revolt, also known as the Third Servile War, had far-reaching consequences for the slave system in the late Roman Republic. A few years after its end, the conditions of slaves in Italy began to improve somewhat, both in terms of treatment and in the reduction of heavy reliance on them. Some historians attribute this to the lingering Roman fear of a repeat of the Spartacus revolt that threatened their security between 73 and 71 BC. The cessation of major conquests under Augustus also contributed to a decrease in the number of new slaves, making them more valuable and better treated. Thus, the Spartacus revolt was not the sole cause, but it was a significant factor in broader transformations. Politically, the suppression of the revolt was a pivotal turning point for Marcus Crassus, who used his wealth and influence to arm the armies and crush the rebellion, thereby gaining significant political legitimacy in Rome. Pompey continued his rise through successful campaigns in the east before joining forces with Crassus and Julius Caesar in the First Triple Alliance, which later paved the way for new conflicts and civil wars. Ironically, two of the pillars of this alliance rose to prominence thanks to a war waged by a rebellious slave. As for Spartacus himself, he was far ahead of his time. Despite the military failure and bloody end of his rebellion, he became an enduring symbol of resistance against oppression. His story inspired subsequent slave revolts and political and social movements across the centuries, from the Mamluk Revolution in Egypt to the Haitian Revolution, and even more recent revolutionary movements bearing his name, such as the Spartacist uprising in Germany in 1919. He also became a cultural icon, appearing in novels, plays and films. Yet the greatest irony lies in the fact that we know very little about the man himself. Ancient sources offer only fragments of his life, sketching out only the broad outlines of a Thracian slave who led a rebellion that shook Rome before being violently crushed. Perhaps this very obscurity is the secret to his enduring legacy. A simple yet powerful story of an enslaved man who defied an empire and left behind a legend that continues to inspire. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.